Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike. You guys rocking with me on Mike's Intellectual Corner. On today's episode, we're going to be diving into a new series called Operation Barbarossa by Potential History. This is a recommendation video and series. With that being said, don't forget to check out my short series today in history.
So it appears, based on the latest gossip from the Reichstag, that preparations for the invasion of the Soviet Union are now underway. In a press conference, Chief of Staff Franz Halder neither confirmed or denied this being the case, but did mention that the previous template used in France and Poland of a hard-hitting, fast, short campaign would be used. The discussion was cut short, though, when one reporter raised his hand, questioning the wisdom of this, as the Soviet Union is a much bigger country and this may not work. This question went unanswered and no more were allowed to be asked.
Yeah, I don't really think it mattered either way who told Hitler or any other higher-ups if this is a good plan or not, because this was Hitler's, original plan since Mein Kampf, since 1920s, 1930s, you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't nothing nobody could do.
Or were allowed to be asked. A hot mic did pick up a few lines from staff, with the only intelligible lines being, "Who cares how big it is? They're just Slavs. How hard could they fight back? I guess only time will tell." I mean, surely they're going to plan this out thoroughly, right? They're not just going to bank on them giving up, right?
Yeah, it's funny because even them thinking that, about Russia and the Russians and all that, and about the Slavic people, I mean, Hitler was still a student of Napoleon and all that stuff, so it's kind of funny that even, he couldn't learn from history, he can learn from somebody else's mistakes on the exact same thing that he's about to embark on. It's kind of funny how that works.
Right? They're not just going to bank on them giving up, right? With this imminent conflict quickly approaching, the German war economy is going to have to be on its front foot to keep up with material production to continue the war effort. For more, we go to our man on the ground, Heinrich, who is in a German munitions factory. Heinrich, can you hear me? It appears he's been called up with the rest of the factory workers to go fight in the campaign. So I guess, this thing does need to end quickly.
Yeah, I think it's funny with everybody having to go into war. I mean, they had 13.6 million people serve in the war with only a population of 86. That's essentially all their manpower. And then on top of that, while everybody was, the Red Army was coming towards Berlin, everybody had to fight at that point. Otherwise, you could, die or whatever. But, yeah.
So I guess, this thing does need to end quickly. Can we get another guy out there? All of them? Okay. Well, apparently that's all we have for now. But tonight at 11, citizens of Berlin are claiming that their city is being bombed in a very strange case of the Mandela effect, even though Reichsminister Goering promised that this could never possibly happen. So how can they be so mistaken?
Okay, real quick, guys. I'm going to go ahead and skip this real quick. Go ahead and watch the original ad in his original video. But the only reason is because the last time I did this, I got hit with a copyright claim because I let the ad play. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and skip this a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and get back into the video.
In the spring of 1941, Germany looked to themselves, and to a lot of the world, as invincible. Quickly rearming into a highly militarized state after the Nazis took power, they were able to conquer almost all of their neighbors, the crown jewel of which being France, the foe that they had fought to a standstill in the last war, much to the happiness of the German High Command, many of whose members had been veterans of that war and lived through the defeat. Although Britain remained unconquered, by the end of the Greek campaign, the majority of continental Europe was under the Nazis' thumb, and Hitler...
I know with all that being done in Western Europe, I think Stalin actually congratulated Hitler on his, accomplishments out west. But he also, in the back of his mind, he also knew that, he was plotting on him again from what he learned from Mein Kampf and all that stuff. But yeah, let's get back into it, guys.
Nazis' thumb. And Hitler was finally able to set his sights on the thing that he had been writing and speaking against for so many years. The, quote, Judeo-Bolshevist bastion of the Soviet Union. The physical embodiment of evil according to the actually evil Nazi ideology. And with his flanks secured as well as they could be.
Yeah, which is funny because he talked crap on Stalin for the Great Purge and all that stuff, but then he went right behind and then did the Night of the Long Knives and all that stuff. So it's like, you know what I'm saying, kind of hypocritical in some of the crap that he was talking. But
His flanks secured as well as they could be, Hitler turned his gaze east, and the invasion was set for June 22nd, 1941. Where the German army, separated into three prongs, Army Group North, Center, and South, would move in and with a swift kick collapse the Soviet Union. The common narrative in the 70-plus years has gone something like this. German army invades the USSR and in a series of incredible victories pushed the Red Army's Asiatic hordes back to the gates of Moscow, and would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for that meddling Russian winter and its stupid rainy season too.
Obviously, we know that it was mainly resources and overstretching of the German lines, pretty much, that really came to a crumbling. And obviously, the two front war didn't help either. But yeah.
However, thanks to a lot of work from historians like David Stahill, whose work I'll be referring to a lot in this video, a much more realistic conclusion begins to unfold. As this operation is probably one of the, if not the most muddled by myths in all of military history. The first being that the German generals were all very nervous to take on the Soviet Union in the first place, and that they did so out of military obedience rather than their own wishes. This is something that comes straight from the German generals' memoirs after the war, as dead Hitler became a very convenient excuse for everything that went wrong in the war, and is an outcropping of the good old everything is Hitler's fault myth that's used to explain all of the German army's shortcomings. See this video by John House that I've referred to a few times for more information on that.
It's all Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler.
You gotta think, they're also being boosted up by a bunch of propaganda, and then the fact that they had such an easy time out west. You know what I'm saying? So they're just thinking, like, let's do it. Essentially.
Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler.
The reality is that it was actually France, not the Soviet Union, that made the German commanders so nervous. German generals in World War II very much had their heads still in World War I. Most of them were veterans in that war, and Hitler's message of a stab in the back really resonated with their feelings of humiliation at the loss of that war, something very well documented by Rob Citino. In World War I, France was unable to be conquered by the German forces, and when it was proposed again to be invaded by Hitler, although German commanders liked the idea, they were understandably...
Yeah, but you also gotta remember, though, too, Germany also beat, France in the Franco-Prussian War. Technically Prussia, but that's Germany. But so, yeah, but obviously that was also like almost 100 years prior. So
commanders liked the idea, they were understandably nervous about getting involved in another potentially 4-year-long attritional war. Once France had been beaten, and so quickly at that, the Soviet Union didn't seem such a daunting task, as Russia had been defeated in 1918. Add to this the unimpressive Red Army performances in the Poland campaign and the Winter War, along with their failing with expeditionary forces and military assistance in Spain, the USSR looked like it could not stand up to the full invading force of the German army, at least from their point of view at the time.
Well, and technically speaking too, the Germans didn't beat the Russians in World War I. The Russians kind of beat themselves through revolution and civil war. Technically speaking, I think the only ones to conquer Russia, technically, even though it wasn't in Russia at the time, were the Mongols, and they just conquered Muscovy, I think, at the time. But yeah,
at least from their point of view at the time, resulting in a good bit of eagerness from the German High Command to take this on, and plans were drawn up. However, this is where the series of mistakes begin to be made that were not entirely obvious or were flat out ignored by those at the top at the time. The point of dissent in the German High Command was with the logistics officers. German Quartermaster General Edward Wagner raised a lot of concerns about taking on the Soviet Union in a typical German-style short campaign with the resources that Germany had currently at its disposal. Stahill mentions that in a memo from him to the High Command, he says that with the current stocks of supplies, an army of 2 million men, about half the number that would actually be deployed, 300,000 horses, also half of the number eventually deployed, and 500,000 vehicles...
Which is why, in my opinion, I think that they should have personally concentrated all of their efforts into the Middle East, because then it wouldn't have started a war with Russia. It would have just kept their war with Britain and technically France and all that. So, in my opinion, they should have just focused in there, took all the oil from there, and then worked their way up from the Caucasus, maybe, and then Maybe. I don't know. Get back into it, I guess.
300,000 horses, also half of the number eventually deployed, and 500,000 vehicles, that the German army would only have enough supplies at the ready to reach Smolensk, which is right here, with the ultimate goal to many of them, Moscow, being a bit further along down here. And that to continue, you would see a kind of stop-start action needing to take place as more supplies would need to be created than shipped from Germany. In hearing this, you would think that that alone would be enough to either stop planning and abandon the operation, or completely rework it to have it be taken on at a smaller scale.
It's crazy too, because they could have, instead of, causing the Holocaust and killing everyone, they could have used people and put them to work. And probably could have also used that to win this war. Just saying, but yeah.
Taken on at a smaller scale. However, those in the high command who knew about this did not see it as a problem, and the reason why really gets to the core of why Barbarossa ended up being such a failure. Germany historically, and in its moves in the previous conquests in World War II, had planned and fought short campaigns. Now this was mostly out of necessity, as Germany is a relatively small nation in Central Europe. They would mobilize their armies, fight their enemy, and demobilize, sending the men back to work in the factories creating material for the next move. This meant that for the German war economy to continue functioning, that Barbarossa had to be planned and executed as a short campaign. The High Command promised the German industrial companies that they would have their workers back by September, meaning they planned to invade, subdue, and demobilize in about 3 months.
What?
Which is a template that completely worked in Poland and Western Europe with small countries with limited areas.
Which is crazy too, because like I said, technically speaking, they cut their population, like, in half, so they had the manpower to do this, but they got rid of it, so.
3 months.
What?
Which is a template that completely worked in Poland and Western Europe with small countries with limited areas for their armies to retreat into, though once enough infrastructure was taken, the country had no choice but to surrender. But in the vastness of the Soviet Union, this tactic was not going to fly. And, like I said previously, these were things that were missed or completely ignored. And this was compounded by the atrocious intelligence provided by the intelligence arms of the German army, who were, to their credit, able to guess fairly accurately the numbers of Soviet troops on the border, but entirely misjudged the number of reserve units that were either further back or in the form of trained reservists that could be called up. Intelligence gathering was difficult because the Soviet Union was a closed country, so reliable information was hard to come by. But in the previous decades, lots of...
Yeah, and I feel like they could have just went to the census back in like 1917, just grabbed that up, because that was still, I'm sure, open, and then went from there. But did a little bit of calculations,
Information was hard to come by. But in the previous decades, lots of German officers had worked and trained in the Soviet Union on modern weapon systems, such as tanks to get around the Versailles Treaty, and would have had at least some knowledge as to what the numerical capabilities of the Red Army were. But according to Stayhill, none of them were even questioned about this in the preparations for the invasion. So we have a template created for Western Europe that will work on small countries, being applied to the vast Soviet Union. Problem number 2 on top of this is that the German invasion lacked any sort of grand strategy. The only real objective was to conquer Russia, and that's left rather vague as to what it means. There was some mention of once they captured Moscow and had conquered basically all the good parts of the Soviet Union, setting up a defense...
Yeah, and who's to say that the Russian people wouldn't have, rose back up and, tried to defeat, their conquerors, because, just like we see all over around the world, and that's too big a world of land for just, their SS groups to come in and try to, strong arm everyone, so...
had conquered basically all the good parts of the Soviet Union, setting up a defensive position called the Archangelsk-Astrakhan Line, or AA Line, which was kind of a general stopping point where they would set up defensive positions and call the thing a success. But the general hope was just to collapse the Soviet Union to where there was no more resistance and it would be completely in German hands, which is really just too broad and very open to interpretation. German commanders really thought that the Soviet Union was in such a weakened state that they would drive in as far as Minsk, or at the furthest Smolensk, and would have destroyed the Red Army and its command structure to the point that no organized resistance would be possible, and that the remaining conquest would just be a smooth march through the Soviet Union. Hence...
Yeah, plus you gotta think their probably heads were so huge after taking out essentially an entire continent. Yeah, an entire continent, essentially. So, yeah, of course they thought that they were going to be able to just do this.
That no organized resistance would be possible, and that the remaining conquest would just be a smooth march through the Soviet Union, hence the rather short deadlines. And the potential problems to do with lack of supplies and potential lack of ability to transport those supplies as they got further and further away from their jumping off point would be mitigated as resistance would be small and sporadic, so large quantities of ammunition and replacements would not be required. The most outstanding thing, though, is that the Germans have absolutely no contingency plan for if things don't work out like this. They are literally assuming that they are so good that after their initial operations, their enemy is not going to be able to recover and that they'll just give up.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest what ifs, obviously, is just of the 20th century, really, is just what if, the Germans would have just waited a few years or just never done it in the first place, Maybe waited until the 21st century or something. Just, who knows? We see what happens.
And that they'll just give up. And they're confident enough in this that they 100% plan for it. And knowing this, a lot of the things that we'll discuss later on begin to make a lot more sense. Now, unlike Kursk, Barbarossa is way too big of a topic to fit into just one video. And within the next month, I'll be putting out a part 2 that I will go into what happened during the operation and the results of the planning. I know, I'm sorry! But before I wrap this up, the biggest question that I had when looking into all of this is why? Why would they go forward with something that had so many variables and not put any thought into what happens if it doesn't go exactly as they expect it to? I mean, at least just in case. The supply situation alone seems like it would be enough to really take a step back and rethink the whole thing. And it seems like no reasonable person would pursue this. And I think the answer to it is that you can't answer this reasonably because you're not dealing with a reasonable thought process.
Which is probably why we see him, later call the German people, cowards, essentially, whenever the Red Army was bearing down, and everybody just wanted the fighting to stop and to give up, and he was, in his bunker, knowing exactly what was about to happen. But yeah, let's go ahead and finish out this video, though, guys.
Process. And once you realize that, it starts to make a lot of crazy decisions that the Germans make in World War II as a whole make at least a little more sense. In one of Stahill's lectures for his books, I think he words this very well, and I'll paraphrase it. He says basically, what does Hitler always talk about in his writings and in his speeches? He's always talking about the triumph of the will. That the way he went from a corporal in the German army in World War I to the leader of the Third Reich was his willfulness to do it and his refusal to give up. And this all ties into the Nazi ideology that I've been mentioning. According to their hierarchy of the races and all the other lunacy that they subscribe to, the superiority of the German people means that their will, and their ability to press on and refuse defeat, is in and of itself what will drive them to victory. And that really, to a ludicrous extent, regardless of the circumstances, this intrinsic part of them that they claim to have will defy the odds and bring victory against the other subhumans that just don't possess this.
Well, and I'm thinking, with them being so confident and stuff, you gotta think, they're also being boosted up by a bunch of propaganda, you know what I'm saying? So they're just thinking, like, let's do it, essentially. But yeah,
subhumans that just don't possess this. And we really see this play out once the operation launches and the Germans take on this thing that they're under-equipped and under-prepared to do. But all this is to say that you can't really look at it logically. You kind of have to look at it through this warped ideology and keep their crazy view of the world in mind. And that's where I think I'll leave it for part 1. I'm really sorry to split it up like this, and I know...
Alright guys, we'll go ahead and stop it right there. Potential History Operation Barbarossa series. Good series. I like the way he presents it. I think if I were to start a YouTube history channel, it would probably be how I would do it. Just talking over, a bunch of good content and good footage and stuff like that. But like I said, very good stuff. With that being said, don't forget to join me on my next episode. Don't forget to check out my series Today in History. I'll see you guys when I see you. I'm out.